Good evening, friends. It's a joy to be with you as always on this Wednesday evening and to reflect together on the Word of God. And I have been taking these Wednesday evening devotionals to sort of look back at the text from Sunday and just do some further reflections on it. Not to re-preach, but to expand. This past Sunday, I did not preach. Jessica preached as part of our Back to the Basics series, where we're looking at our mission statement. It's kind of going bit by bit through the mission statement. And we've started, the mission statement of our church is inviting people of all ages and backgrounds into a growing relationship with Christ. So we looked at this whole idea of what it means to invite and to be invited. Inviting people. Then we kind of looked at what it means to invite people of all ages and how important it is to be crossing generational barriers with the gospel. And then last week, Jessica looked at what it meant to invite people of all ages and backgrounds. And she looked at this text from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 2, and I highly encourage you to go back and listen to the sermon. It was excellent, and I enjoyed it and felt convicted by it. Mark chapter 2, verse 13, the calling of Levi. Once again, Jesus went out. If you have your Bibles, please join me. Mark chapter 2, verse 13. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." And that is a verse that we're encouraging everybody to memorize this week. Mark 2:17. On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." That is a foundational text in Christian theology in terms of the mission of Christ, the nature of salvation, and the nature of the Christian community that he creates, and the parameters of our call as we follow Christ. We're to do the same kind of inviting in the same way, which is pretty tall order in our broken world. So I just want to kind of walk through this text and give some of my reflections as I've thought about it since Jessica preached Sunday. This passage is very important. It shows up in all three synoptic gospels. The synoptic gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, called synoptic because they offer something of a story of the life of Jesus. They're clearly related to each other, though each one of them contains different passages or different takes on the same stories, but they're very much interrelated. The Gospel of John is a totally different kind of book. It is much less biographical and much more kind of a wisdom tradition approach to who Jesus was, and focuses particularly on Jesus kind of the cosmic aspect of Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, his unity with God, his divinity. Whereas the first three, while those themes are present, focuses much more on the person of Jesus and his ministry as one who came from God and was anointed by the Spirit as Messiah in Galilee among the Jews and in Judea. So this story about the calling of Levi appears in all three of the synoptic Gospels. There is a huge difference between the Mark and Luke accounts and the account in Matthew, because Matthew has a different name for this tax collector. And the tax collector's name is Matthew. So there's always all kinds of debates and disputes on these little matters of the seeming discrepancies in the Bible. I think the most probable answer is that the tax collector's name was Levi, and the name Matthew may have been a name given to him as an apostle, or a nickname that he began to be known as, which happened with some of the other apostles. Think of Simon Peter Cephas. Well, he has three names. Was one more used in his family and Jewish circles, others used more in the Greek church. We don't know. But it's not really that big of a deal to see a different name here, because that is not uncommon in other stories in the New Testament for people to have more than one name that they're known by, even though we don't always know the reasons. So once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd gathered to him. We're back in Mark. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's table. I don't think this was the first time that Jesus saw Levi/Matthew. I'm going to call him Levi because we're focusing on Mark. I don't think that in the other accounts of the disciples being called, Peter, James, and John being called from their fishing boats, I don't think those were the first times that Jesus had seen them, or maybe that they had seen Jesus. There was some overlap, we know from John's Gospel, between the followers of John the Baptist, namely Andrew, Peter's brother, and then those who followed Jesus. So this isn't, I think sometimes we read these texts as though, boom, Jesus just encountered a strange man and just walked up to him and said, hey, come follow Jesus. In fact, I think that's kind of been part of a lot of evangelism strategies. Find a stranger near you and invite them to follow Jesus. I don't believe that these people were fully strangers, even if they weren't intimate friends. Jesus lived for 30 years in Galilee before he started his ministry. And as in many tribal and traditional societies, there are lots of interconnections in local regions among families and clans and people, especially when there are such divides between Jews and non-Jews. So we don't know the background, and the text doesn't give us all that background because in some ways that is less important than what happens in these encounters. But I do think it's important to know that Jesus was not just walking up to random strange people he'd never seen before. In some ways, I think even his call of these individuals had more to do with God's timing and God's direction and the leading of the Spirit than just simply kind of out of nowhere. And I wish we knew the backstory of how much Jesus knew Levi, how many times he had paid taxes. Now, there's something for us to ponder. The fact that Jesus, despite the fact that he claimed to be a king in his ministry, a Messiah, not just to the Jews, but to the whole world. Think about the ending of Matthew's gospel. All authority has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all people groups throughout the world. Despite this reality, in his earthly life, he lived in between. His ultimate loyalty was always to the kingdom of God, to his Father, and to himself as king and leader. Yet he interacted with the world in which he lived, including paying taxes. There's a story about it. I believe it's in Luke's gospel. So, and he even says, give to Caesar what is Caesar, to God what is God's. Jesus is in the world and not of the world. He isn't always wanting to tear the world down and, do away with the abusive tax policies of Rome. Jesus is playing the long game in terms of establishing his kingdom. And I think for Jesus it means you don't establish it all at once. His call was not to use violence to overthrow and march on the world and establish a new order in Jerusalem. It was a long game of slowly but surely undermining the claims of the world and its powers and creating a new and beautiful community, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the beloved community, right in the middle of the mess. And it doesn't get any more messy than calling Levi to be part of this journey, because Levi was a clear religious reject. I don't know what an equivalent for us might be today. Maybe it would be some pretty decent religious folk, which I'm guessing Peter, James, and John were. It would be the equivalent of saying, yeah, we'd like for you, decent middle class, small business owner type people, religious enough to follow me, Jesus says. And oh, by the way, while we're going through this area, I need to pop in at this bar and invite this local bartender to follow me too. Now, I don't know, that may not be strong enough, because there are many bartenders who are wonderful people. But at least among religious folks, we have a sense of, if you're a Christian, what are you doing working in a bar? Maybe, hey, let's get more radical. Maybe it was him stopping by a really rough section of town and talking to a pimp or a prostitute and saying, come, follow me. Now we're feeling the kind of, how could he response that I think the disciples felt when Jesus called Levi. And right there is, I think, the great discomfort of the gospel. No matter what we say, many of us still feel worthier, more or less worthy of being with Christ, based on our background, our lifestyle, our reputation, moral reputation. We find a pecking order, and we don't even mean to. We can't help it. I can't help it. I mean to be gracious. I really do. I mean to be welcoming. I don't mean to see myself as inherently better than other people, but I feel that way, you know. If Jesus calls me, which I believe he has, into his kingdom, and then he calls a notorious drug dealer and throws me and him together, I feel concerned. I feel maybe concerned for my own safety. Also, maybe like, hey, I've been doing it right this whole time. Now he's going to be a leader in the church. And what if God called that guy to be a pastor and asked me to go to his church? I mean, you see how the gospel just messes with our ideas about people, the limits of God's grace, the sociology that we all inherit. We are born into a world full of divisions and inequalities and insiders and outsiders, and that can shift all around depending on where you are and who you are, and it's just really hard not to fall into it and just let the world define who's in and who's out, and be okay with that and just try to be comfortable in our place, or maybe try to scoot up into a better place. But very few of us are going to go out and seek to be with lower people, people of lower status or checkered pasts and backgrounds. So immediately this text is just confrontive. Jesus issues the same call to Levi that he issued to Peter, James, and John. Now, I think that's interesting too, because we would look at what they were doing and we would say, well, they weren't doing anything wrong. Why did they have to leave their stuff in order to follow Jesus? What were they doing? They were fishing. They were running their businesses. They were feeding their families. They were keeping up the tradition. The text says they were fishing with Zebedee, James and John's dad. And yet Levi was engaged in a profession that was seen as collaborating with the Romans and even cheating his own fellow Jews out of money through the corrupt Roman tax system. So he was just seen as a bad guy, just in it for wealth, in it for himself, not for even for his own people. So he was considered as bad as a Gentile, a non-Jew, as outside of God's grace and away from God's fold. So, they both get the same call. Jesus doesn't say to Matthew, "You've been horrible, but I'm still going to call you." He just says the exact same words. Follow me. Follow me. There is such a desire in us to clean people up quickly, before or right as we're inviting them to follow Jesus. I hear it all the time in talking to Christians. We can hardly let a gracious word pass out of our mouths before we then quickly say, "Oh, but this isn't condoning their lifestyle or their patterns of sin or anything like that. They still need to change." And yeah, the scriptures teach that. But I just think it's interesting that we have a real hard time just opening up our hearts with the message of the gospel and the grace of God without quickly adding, but it doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. I think it means we don't trust grace. And I think it means we don't trust God. I think on some pretty deep levels, we still want decent, non-messy people in our church. And we have a very low tolerance for anyone who comes in and doesn't quickly become like us. It's messy. And I'm talking to myself here, friends. I'm not talking at you. I am letting this word convict me as well. They both receive the same call. I think it's also a reminder that what we often consider to be noble, tradition, respect, hard work, family values, you find all those things in Peter, James, and John in their work as fishermen and keeping up the family business. Jesus says, follow me. Apparently tradition and family and hard work and all of that is also not salvation. And boy, do we still think it is. We think having tidy families and working hard and trying to get ahead and being respectful and being good citizens and feeling, pretty proud about how good we're doing. We feel like all of that is really reason to brag sometimes and to look askance at others who are not in the same position. And Jesus says to people, follow me. Lay that stuff aside. That's not enough. Tradition is not enough. Family values, loyalty to your dad is not enough. God doesn't call us to tradition or family values any more than he calls us to a life of making money and being self-interested. God calls us away from anything that would compete with loyalty to him and his kingdom. And that most often is not really bad things. It's good things that are too important to us and that can never be challenged. And so Jesus challenges both the good things that matter too much and the bad things that are clearly wrong. And says, neither one of those is enough. You got to lay those behind and follow me into my kingdom. And I do think we see just a complete acceptance of Levi as he is. Jesus was having dinner, verse 15, at Levi's house. Many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him. I think they were intrigued, these people who were outcasts and really sinners is in quotes. I think that's a good interpretation by the NIV and other Bibles that do that, because sinners wasn't just, it's not what we would say theologically about everyone, all are sinners. It was more of a category, kinds of people, notorious people, adulterers, prostitutes, partiers, tax collectors, just not morally okay people. And here they all are, and Jesus is eating with them, which implies acceptance and equality. Gosh, here we go again. It just challenges us at every level. It doesn't indicate that he was sitting there trying to fix them and accuse them. And yet, if they'd heard his teaching, they had heard his talk about the kingdom of God, the need to leave behind old loyalties and follow him and pursue God's kingdom. They probably had heard some of his teaching on money and the deadliness of accumulating great wealth and pursuing that as an end. And so I think there's transformation that happens as Jesus is hanging out with people. There are so many stories of where Jesus interacts with people, and it's not so much that he sets out to fix them, it's that they are changed by his presence. And so it is, I think, the very love and grace and acceptance of Jesus that actually brings about gratitude and love and transformation, and people wanting to let go of inadequate things and wrong things that they've been doing, and give their lives to him and let him change them, and like Zacchaeus, go back and make things right. And we don't have that same kind of picture happening here in Matthew. We don't know if Matthew or Levi went back and fixed all of his issues from the past. My guess is that he did. The main point that Mark wants us to see is how upset the Pharisees were with Jesus. They were angry. And they felt like Jesus was betraying them and betraying the Jews as well, simply by accepting these others into fellowship. We are told, verse 15, well, first of all, the fact that Levi got up and followed Jesus, there's an indication of repentance and turning away. And then verse 15, while Jesus was having dinner, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. So there was a whole movement among these people to be spiritually renewed and awakened, but they were doing it directly through Jesus and were not jumping through the weighty, cumbersome process that it would have taken to become a Pharisee or a really respectable Jew. They short-circuited all that by responding directly to Jesus. And the Pharisees hated this. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" They didn't get it, just like we really don't get it today. How someone whose life isn't all right, or who has different views or different maybe things that we think are unacceptable in their lives, how can they be in the same fellowship with us? Well, if they're responding to Jesus, that's what makes us Christians. And we are not on a scale of first-class Christians, second-class Christians, third-class, depending on how tidy our lives are or how messy. We're all on a journey with Christ, but we are in the same position and same status. As soon as we repent and begin to follow, we're in the same, there's equality in our position before God. And the truth is, this text reveals that a lot of the folks who seem respectable actually have deep, deep spiritual problems. And I think this is really hard for those of us like myself who had invested so much of my life and reputation as being a respectable person. It was hard for me to get to a place where I realized that all of that stuff meant nothing to God. I hate to say it even now. Because I know then the obvious response is, well, does that mean we just shouldn't care at all? No. I think God uses the path to respectability in some ways to create stability in society and decency and good manners and social concern, which is good as far as it goes. But it does not make us holy, and in fact, many of us who are respectable tend to suppress our struggles with sin or, hide them and have a hypocrisy about us that at some point God simply has to say, hey, I don't love you because of your respectability. I love you because I love you. And in fact, you got to let some of that go because you're super proud. The tax collector, the Pharisees just struggled with it so much because they had worked hard and played by the rules, and they were expecting God to bless them for that and bless their nation. And instead, he sends Jesus, or Jesus says he comes from God, which they never really believed, because Jesus didn't play by their rules. He just welcomed people from all backgrounds. And Jesus, when he hears that they're complaining, says, hey, listen, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I didn't come to call the righteous, but to call sinners. Now, I think if they had been paying attention, and maybe some of them were, they would have found the irony. Because at first it kind of seems like him saying, listen, I'm not here for you guys. You're doing just fine. I'm here for the really bad people. But if they'd paid a little bit of closer attention, they would have understood that he was including them in the category of sinners. Because in saying that he didn't come to call the righteous, well, no one is righteous except God and those who fully embody his will and obey his will. And while the Pharisees were self-righteous in that they thought they were fully obeying what God wanted, in many ways they were missing out on the greater righteousness of God that even shows up in the Old Testament. The Gospel of Matthew in this story records that Jesus also says to them, but go, and Matthew's always very concerned to show connections to the Old Testament, and so he made sure to include this reference from Jesus. Jesus says in Matthew chapter 9 verse 12, it is not the healthy who need a doctor but the sick, but go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And that is a quotation from the book of Hosea chapter 6 verse 6, where the prophet says, what can I do with you, Ephraim? Which is another name for Israel. What can I do with you, Judah? Your love is like the morning mist, like the early dew that disappears. Therefore I cut you in pieces with my prophets. I killed you with the words of my mouth. My judgments flash like lightning upon you. For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. In other words, Jesus is reminding them of the long, long history of the worship of Yahweh by God's covenant people, that it was very often easy for them to substitute religiosity, temple worship, sacrifices, keeping up good religious appearances, doing all the rituals and routines, and having hearts that were far from God, that didn't look in mercy upon their fellow humans, upon their fellow Jews, but that treated them harshly and unjustly and judgmentally. So Matthew reminds us in his gospel that this is an undiagnosed spiritual condition in the Pharisees. They're not righteous. They're self-righteous. They have a false veneer that lacks humility, that lacks teachability, that lacks mercy, that lacks grace, that lacks love, that lacks openness. It's a hard and critical, exclusive view, and they're not bad people. They're just like a lot of us. And Jesus says, I've only come for sinners. I think many of us know that theologically we're sinners, but we don't believe it really deeply personally. That there's something very fundamentally flawed about me that has nothing really to offer except for my desperate need for God's mercy and grace. Oh, it's a convicting passage, isn't it? Somebody asked me on the way out of church, so Pastor Derek, do you think you're more of a, want to sit at the insiders table with the Pharisees, or would you be comfortable sitting with the outsiders? And I said, thanks for asking. I'm probably more comfortable with the insiders. I'm not proud of that. I want to grow and be better. God has stretched me, God has called me, but my comfort zone is to hang out with decent people that I'm comfortable with, who I agree with in terms of their theology and their lifestyle choices and their moral values and approach to any number of issues. It's just more comfortable. But this passage is certainly not about our comfort, is it? It's a passage we need to pray about. So let's do that together. Lord, we need you. We cannot read these words without seeing how, on some level, you're trying to pull apart our worldview and our entire approach to human society, much less the church. And it's just so uncomfortable, Lord. Have mercy on us in our discomfort, that we might be more available and more open and more broken in our own hearts, that our self-righteousness would break down and we would have a vulnerability there and a growing concern for the well-being of others and a willingness to sit with them and invite them to join us in Christ on the long journey of becoming like you. Thank you, Father, for hearing our prayer. In your holy name, amen. The Lord bless you.